listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope Pastors, where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Jonny Rashid. I use he, him pronouns.
I'm Rachel Sensenig. I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Julie Hoke. I use she, her pronouns too.
It became fall in Philadelphia just this week, it feels like. It was like summer earlier.
Yes, it did.
And now it's fall, and we just had an election, and it isn't as bad as I thought. So here we are, just staring Christmas down the barrel.
Not yet.
Definitely.
No, we have a little time. How about Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving's part of Christmas.
No.
I know you start listening to Christmas music on Thanksgiving, Jonny.
I listened to the 12 Days of Christmas 4 times yesterday because one of my children requested it.
Wow.
Kids are good because they want the same thing again and again. Mm-hmm. You know, G.K. Chesterton has a quote about, like, how God is like a child in wanting, like, the sun to rise every day. Or, let me look it up, actually. I'll see if I can find it. Oh, yeah, here it is. I think. I hope this is the thing. The sun rises every morning. I do not rise every morning, but the variation is not due to my activity, but to my inaction. Now, to put the matter in a popular phrase, it might be true that the sun rises regularly because he never gets tired of rising. His routine might be due not to a lifelessness, but to a rush of life. The thing I mean can be seen, for instance, in children. When they find some game or joke that they especially enjoy, a child kicks his legs rhythmically through excess, not absence of life. Because children have abounding vitality, they are in spirit fierce and free. Therefore, they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, do it again. And the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead. But grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun. And every evening, do it again to the moon. Isn't that sweet?
It really is.
A great quote.
Yeah, he was quite a writer.
That's beautiful.
And it is beautiful. And yet I'm also thinking about the eclipse that just happened. And thinking about the variation and how just wildly beautiful and incredible it is to see such a... I didn't stay up. I didn't see it. I just looked at pictures, but...
My daughter was out there, and I'm thinking about how she actually drove to the art museum steps with her friends at 4 a.m. or something. But I'm thinking about how that instinct changes, like, for the teenagers I know, they don't, they're not saying do it again anymore. In fact, like, you know, life is sort of, like, vastly, like they want a freedom from the traditions, and yet there is still that instinct of, like, looking for comfort in the rhythm. Like I feel still there's a longing there for to know that the sun is going to rise, that some things won't change. And I think that feels resonant of my own adult instincts. Well, we got really into a whole nother topic here. This is normally our talkback time. We like to open our podcast episodes with a time to reflect on what folks are saying in our communities, what we're hearing. And I heard a great question in our Sunday meeting talkback this week that I wanted to pose to you, Julie and Jonny, and our listeners here, because I just really appreciated the vulnerability in this question. We were talking about a person in the Bible who listened to God And this person asked, well, how? How do you hear from God? I've never heard from God in my whole life. How do you actually do that? And so I'm wondering if that resonates with you too. That struggle to actually, receive direction or something from beyond.
Great question. I've been there too, and will be again. I appreciate that she just said it, like in the midst of a story of someone hearing from God. It's so. I don't know. I can relate to that when I hear someone sharing their own story of hearing from God with clarity or confidence, or like read it in scripture. It does stir up for me, like, oh, I want that too, And a story somehow always seems to clarify the hearing in a way that doesn't always feel so clarified in the moment, We often talk about the multiple ways that God can speak, and sort of like running it through layers of discernment. We say running the bases. I don't know where that came from. I'm not a sports person, so I don't know why that metaphor got used to begin with. But when we're thinking about hearing from God, it helps to run it through the bases of like, what is Scripture saying? What do we hear in all of creation? How does creation inform what we're hearing about, from God? Community, both, ancestors of the faith and also present day community of Jesus followers. Am I missing one?
Yep, the indwelling Holy Spirit.
Yes,
like in our own bodies, minds, hearts.
Yeah, there's lots of things to listen to when we're trying to discern what God's saying.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. That one of our leaders was noting that you use that word lots, Julie. That multiplicity. She was even saying God is limitless, and she used this word from this verse from Job, where it says, "For God does speak, now one way, now another." And so it like requires this ongoing listening. It's not like we just get it one time and then we're good to the rest of our days. This is an ongoing process.
One of the things that I like to think about in these times is that there isn't always a right way to listen, and there isn't always a right answer. Mm-hmm. And like, you can make a mistake or you can try again, and that's like, sometimes you make like a bigger mistake, but like, I hope it's freeing for us to know that like, we can try again. We can try a different thing. We don't know how it's all going to work. And you don't need a right answer all the time, But then, like, for me, listening to people that are close to me, that know me, that helps me with personal things. And then for the church, like, listening to the body, listening to our history, listening to what's worked before, what hasn't, listening to voices that we haven't normally listened to, and things like that help us to hear what God is doing, or what God might want us to do.
Yes.
It also occurs to me that, I don't know, whoever said this, asked this question, likely has been in some way a source of revelation to the people around them. Mm-hmm. And so even when we ourselves are asking the question, how do I hear from God? How do I know it is God speaking to me? I feel like I don't have these kinds of experiences that other people do, or those kinds of thoughts. It really does help, like Jonny's saying, to have a community around you, because oftentimes people can feed back to us the ways in which God is speaking to them through us, through our lives, through our presence, and that kind of two-way feedback is, I think, helps us to tune into the indwelling of the Spirit, like you said, like the presence, God's presence among us. That's what we're listening to. And each person is a part of that. Even if we feel like we're struggling to hold on to that reality ourselves.
Yes, Julie. And that is exactly what happened in the moment in the meeting when this person asked the question. It was revelation for all of us. The people actually began feeding back to her ways that she reveals God to the rest of us, and so we kind of loosely concluded, oh, this is basically about just showing up and making ourselves available to one another and to God's Spirit among us. Not, like Jonny said, not landing on a particular right or wrong way or right or wrong answer. It is just about showing up, being available, being open. So that was comforting to me too.
Beautiful.
Talk back to us at Resist and Restore Podcast at circleofhope.net. We want to hear from you, so if you listen to this podcast, please write back. Let us know what you think. Let us know what your questions are or what commentary you want to make. And be sure to write a review where you listen to this podcast. Give it a high rating. Share it with people that would like it. Share it on social media. And also subscribe to it. You can go to circleofhope.church to find out how to participate in our cells and our Sunday meetings, how to read our daily prayer, and also how to share in our common fund. You can contribute anything you want. No amount is too little or too great. It helps keep this show going and helps keep the work that we're doing at Circle of Hope going as well. Thanks for listening. Hey y'all, I'm so excited to have Andre Henry here on our podcast. He wrote a book called All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. I found it very resonant. He's an award-winning musician, writer, and activist. He writes for the Religion News Services, and I'm so glad to have him here as a co-laborer in nonviolent struggle. So welcome to the show, Andre.
Thanks for having me.
This book spoke to a lot of us in Circle of Hope, the church where I pastor, as we were doing anti-racist work in a predominantly white church. And you certainly have that experience, and you shared it. Towards the beginning of the book, you say the sad truth about white people is that most of them are too attached to the notion of racial superiority to cheer, much less fight for racial progress. In your experience, how is that woven into white people?
I think that there's a kind of indoctrination that happens to, those of us who have grown up in the States, right? We are literally educated in this mythology of white superiority in many ways, right? And I think that just to say it in plain English, I think that a lot of white people just think that they're better than people who aren't white, right? And I don't think that they know that they hold that belief consciously. I think a lot of white people are not aware that that is the position that they hold. But if you were to talk to them about what they think is, what is the right word here? Low class, what they think is rude, what they think is inappropriate, what they think is sophisticated, what they think is civilized. They'll just describe their own habits and norms, right?
Totally.
And the things that don't fit into those habits and norms, right, are the things that they assume that other people are doing wrong, badly, and need to change, right? And so I feel like that's when you say how is it woven in, I think that's how it's woven in. I'm reminded of, I think, a story that I did tell in the book with a woman that I was talking to about police brutality. And she said something like, well, if they just dressed normally, maybe they wouldn't receive that kind of violence. And because she was my friend at the time, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt and give her grace. And so I pressed her gently to tell me, what do normal people look like? You know? And I wouldn't let it go. Like, I didn't keep asking the same question over and over again, but I wouldn't let it go until she gave me an answer. And when she gave me the answer, she looked shocked. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised. I knew exactly what she was saying, but she was shocked to find when she said, I guess they look like me. Right. And
Wow.
I guess to your question about how is it woven in, I think that's what it is that it's like the air that we breathe, right? It's like a fish being in water. Like that's just what it is.
One of the things that I've encountered is consciousness of our racism is, for white people especially, it's hard to come by because we're told in many, many ways that racism is wrong. And
Right.
so people think, as long as I'm not using the N-word, as long as I'm not in a KKK rally, as long as I'm not, you know, a supporter of David Duke, then I'm not racist, because
Right.
we have seen such explicit, flagrant demonstrations of racism.
Yeah.
But I think that fear of being racist does get inside. Like you start to, because you can't admit to yourself that you are, you just hide it from yourself.
Right.
And you just live your life in a way that contributes harm. And when you're confronted, because we feel it, people of color feel it.
Right.
And so when we share our experience, all of a sudden we're dealing with white feelings and white fragility.
Yeah.
And a reaction and a defensiveness. And sometimes it's like, yeah, I'm not going to keep sharing my experience, and I'm going to talk to people and relate to people that understand it already.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, exactly what you said is like kind of what the book is about, right? It's like when you start talking about what it feels like to be a non-white person in a society that was literally built on the idea of white superiority to justify all the power inequities and all that kind of stuff, you know, you end up, or at least I did. I mean, I hope that some of this is changing. I mean, most of the people around me in general, regardless of race, seem to at least concede that racism is a problem now after the killing of George Floyd. But in 2014, 2012, 2013, 2016, that was not my experience when I spoke up about my experience in the world. Most of the white people, I would say, that were around me at the time were in denial, right? And I feel like, I don't know if I would still describe the time that we're in right now as like white people are necessarily denying racism as much as trying to make themselves the victims, right? Like now, okay, that they're finding that language politically useful and trying to say, oh, no, we're not the racists. You guys are the racists because now you want to steal, now you want to replace us, right? That's the big lie.
Totally. And they often will take the position of the oppressed person now, you know.
Yes.
They subvert the language, and they you know, they want to act like they're the victims.
Yes, but to your point, the book is very much about like that experience when you're like, I can't keep having these same conversations over and over again, you know, about whether or not racism exists, who's really being affected by it, why is it an important problem? You know, if we're building, you know, I was thinking about, I think about this all the time. It's like, you're a rocket scientist, right? And you and your other rocket scientist colleagues are working on some new technology, and some intern is in the room and is like, we can't do that because, you know, machines can't fly. Like, does everyone in the room now need to stop to get this person up to speed, or does that person need to leave the room? Like, you know, and totally. That's kind of like that's kind of like what I learned in the book, where a major lesson in the book is that I'm talking to people and saying, you know, if you want to do something about racism, if you want to do something about climate change, if you want to do something about, democracy, because we know democracies are backsliding all over the world. I don't know how useful it is for us to just like keep on arguing with people who literally do not want to see the truth of the problem.
If we have a common mission,
yeah,
it's one thing. But if you're hostile to the mission, hostile to the position, it's a lot of wasted time to try to convince you to do something.
Exactly. Like if you and I are trying to fight racism, but you're like, Andre, the only way that this is going to happen is if we blow up some buildings. And I'm like, no, man, we can't blow up buildings. That's a conversation worth having because we're working on the same project.
Right, exactly. So, people talk to me a lot about this and they're like, is there any room for political diversity? And I said, yes, if we're on the same mission, people on the left in particular would benefit from less ideological commitment and more cooperation as we're working on a common cause.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean we cooperate with white supremacists.
Yes.
There's just a difference.
We can't cooperate with white supremacists.
You talk about this. Talk towards the end of the book, you actually talk about unity that's good and unity that isn't good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So unity among common activists, that's
right.
positive. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But you can't have unity. Like you can't have unity between, for instance, like fascists and anti-fascists, you know what I'm saying? Like
totally.
You can't unify because, I can't unify with someone who wants to oppress me because then I have to turn against myself, right?
Yeah, it's like ICE agents and immigrants in the same church.
Right, right, exactly. And that's even just kind of subtly bringing up that point, it's like, I think that when we're talking, in my experience in church, I have often found, people who want to have that exact vision. I see pastors and people tweet things like that, right? Mm-hmm. Like we have ICE agents and immigrants in our church as though this is like a badge of honor for them, and it's like, okay, you might think that's good, but it's probably because you have the privilege of not knowing what that would feel like for someone who might be in danger of deportation to be sitting in the same room with someone who could make the order to do so.
Totally. We talk a lot about in Christianity, this image of peace where in the age to come, the lion lays next to the lamb. Mm-hmm. The beauty of that image is that the lion doesn't want to eat the lamb anymore. Like that's the lion changed, But like, don't put your lamb next to a lion in the savannah if you want the lamb to live still, because right now it's not working that way,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Lay down your guns, lay down your badge, lay down your uniform, change your mind, but if you don't, we're putting our most vulnerable at risk.
Right. And then there can be unity. And that's exactly that chapter about the truth about unity is like, yeah, we do need unity to work on the same project, of building a world where we can all be safe and building a world where we can all, have the resources that we need where we can live, without violence. Yeah. Like we need unity amongst the people who are trying to bring that world about. But you can't have one writer described it as a unity fetish. And that term has just stuck with me for years, is that like that kind of unity fetish that imagines that, the lead, like the folks on the ground at the BLM protests can just somehow overlook, the violence that the Proud Boys are doing and like just live in harmony it's nonsensical. And that idea, like many of the ideas that I'm trying to like take off the table in the book, I think is something that really hinders better racial justice work, right?
Totally.
Because when you start talking about the thing that actually needs to happen, which is organized, strategic, nonviolent struggle, a lot of people do default to these ideas like, oh, like we just need to love each other. Yeah, sure, I'll take that, you know, but like you said, pretending that the lion doesn't want to eat me is not the same as us loving each other, you know?
Yeah, I mean, what does love really mean? Then, I mean, to me, that means being anti-racist. Racism is about hatred. So if we're going to love
Exactly.
each other, that's what we're doing.
Exactly. And we hear people say all the time, love is a verb, right?
Hmm.
And so, like, we can't just like say that we love everyone. Sometimes that love looks like something, right? Like if love is a verb, it means that it's an action. And what does that action look like when someone that we claim to love is under attack?
Totally.
You know,
Exactly. What does that look like?
you know, like you got to do something to try to protect your loved ones. I'm sure any parent listening to this recording would think it's ridiculous for a parent to say, "Yeah, I love my kids, but I wouldn't protect them from a robber." Like,
Absolutely.
like if a robber busts in my house, I'm just gonna let my kids get abducted. No, you wouldn't do that because you love your kids, right?
Hmm.
And when it comes to us, like talking about, people who come from marginalized communities, oftentimes, people want to look down on us because protest and nonviolent action doesn't always look like. I said always, and as soon as I said always, I'm like, I don't know an instance where nonviolent action has looked like bypassing the harm being done by oppressors. It's actively confronting them, right? And we do that because we love ourselves. Love is an action, right? So I'm going to protect myself too,
Totally.
you
Totally.
know, and organize nonviolent struggle against these systems that wish to cause us harm, that wish to kill us in some, in many instances. Like that is also love too.
Absolutely. You talk about breaking up with a white Jesus in your
Yeah.
book.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, you'll talk about how you've still clung to some spirituality and haven't
Mm-hmm.
rejected faith altogether. I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
space you're still occupying,
Yeah.
but what was it like for you? Because you went to Fuller, right? And
Yeah.
that's
Mm-hmm.
like the foremost evangelical seminary, in many
Yeah.
ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, you're inundated by whiteness around you and by white Christianity. What was the
Mm-hmm.
process like for you to let go of white Jesus and to still have some faith?
Um, I would say, long, confusing, terrifying, because I never had any intention to not be evangelical in my life. Right? Like I didn't know a lot of the history, like of the violence, of the white supremacy, all that kind of stuff of evangelicalism. So then like when I found out, I was pretty naive. Like I expected, like there's these moments in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible rather, where okay, for instance, I think it was Josiah, like King Josiah found the book of Deuteronomy.
Hmm.
And according to the text, King Josiah brings the Torah, this to the people. And there's this huge sense in the text among the people that, oh my gosh, like we're way off course here. We need to correct some things because this is not how God wants for us to live. Right. I really thought that a lot of the folks that I'd grown up with, that I'd worshiped with, were really acting in good faith. And if they knew or they could see that either their active or passive support for white supremacy, systemic racism, racial violence, however we want to call it, was not just in contradiction with the faith that they claimed to live in, but I mean, with my vocabulary back then, sin. I mean, that's
Sure.
I right, like if I thought that if the people that I knew could see the way that the way that yes, their active or passive support for systemic racism as sin, that would matter to them and that they would want to repent of that. And I was very wrong about that. I couldn't have been more wrong. And that was a type of moment where you're forced to deconstruct some core beliefs, right? I had been I went to Southeastern University before any of that happened, evangelical school in Lakeland, Florida. And I remember every year I would learn something in class that was like, okay, well, now I got to rethink, everything that, every year, at least in one class, I would learn something about some biblical text, something about some history, and I'd have to rethink things. And I was thankful for those moments. I loved those moments because for me, it was like I wasn't just learning something new about some ancient text. I was learning something more about the God that I believed
Mm-hmm.
in. And so, I mean, there's this huge conversation among Christians that I'm not typically interested in, but I mean, that was deconstructing and reconstructing every year. But there's a different kind of deconstructing that you have to do when it comes to like religious trauma,
Big
right?
time.
Because this was not just me like reading biblical scholars and then being like, listen, Moses couldn't have written the first 5 books of the Bible. The first 5 books of the Bible talk about Moses' death. How could Moses write about his death? Okay, so for me, it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, right? No pasa nada, right? Just so, as they say, that's not a big deal to me. But to find out that the people that you worshiped alongside of, some of them close friends, some of them that felt like family, literally kind of the whole time thought that they were better than most Black people and wouldn't lift a finger to make the world any safer for people like you.
Mm.
That these people truly believe that God does not care about racism. As one pastor told me, looked me in the face and said that.
That's so wild.
That was a whole nother thing. And so I had to like think through this cognitive dissonance where it's like, I already knew that the church was responsible for a lot of violence, right, in history. And I defended Christianity from the epithet of being the white man's religion as growing up, But in that moment, that summer of 2016 through 2017, I really had to like think through, what do I really believe about this? Because these people are essentially telling me that God is one of them.
Absolutely.
God is one of them. God is on their side. God cares about their concerns. God wants to they can cast their burdens on Jesus because Jesus cares about their problems, but not mine. And so, yeah, I gave up on everything for a while. And then the process of me being open, respectful, and even wanting a spirituality of my own after that came from studying revolutions more deeply.
Totally. Yeah.
Because I started at forget all the spiritual stuff, because the religious folks and the non-religious folks are all spiritual bypassing, right? Like the Christians are doing it in the name of Jesus, and the love and light people are doing it in the name of love and light. Mm-hmm. So all I care about is the material conditions, and that's where I started. And I found that in every revolution that I've read, and I'm still reading about revolutions today, there are always religious traditions, there are always religious institutions, there are always religious people. There's always spirituality somewhere in the mix of it. And that alone made me like, okay, Andre, I know that it may sound badass to you right now to be like, I'm a materialist, I don't believe in all that stuff, I just want people to be free. But there are people who've actually done a lot more than you for our collective liberation. And they didn't throw spirituality out the window.
No, not at all. I mean, the need for transcendent hope to make imminent progress is really important.
I love the way that you phrase that. Transcendent hope for imminent progress. Yeah.
Like to do it right now, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a reason why we have to sing when we're doing the revolution,
Mm-hmm.
Like it's about our soul, it's about our body, we need hope. It's like in faith and spirituality add, really some things that are intangible to our struggle, that are necessary. Like we still need to dance, even though someone might say you should be doing something real practical and real material. No, we also need to dance. We need to pray. We need to cry. Those things are
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you meant to go here, but it just reminds me of just like, it just sounds very Puritan, right? To be like, what are you doing dancing? We're supposed to be building the revolution.
Totally. I think in the midst of it, we can't let people who oppress us steal our joy from us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because that honestly is a victory in itself for the oppressive system, right? It's like there has to be some terrain that is like it's yours, right? And that terrain inside, that internal terrain, like honestly, so from reading more of like Fanon about decolonization and stuff like that has been really helpful because he talks about that, that would be a great victory for the
Absolutely.
oppressive system to, I think Fanon phrased it as an evacuation of the self. Right. And that's something I think that may be something surprising about the book is that like later on in the book, I'm writing a lot about like reconnecting with my ancestral roots, going back to Jamaica where my family is from, and all of that, because when you start rejecting kind of like these forms of being and these forms of thinking that this oppressive system wants for you to live in, where do you go? you know? Now, obviously, we all can't go all the way back to wherever our ancestors came from and live like they did. The world is too different now. But
Totally.
I have been like, in some sense, trying to shed this false self that the oppressive system wants for you to adopt, uphold, nurture, cultivate, right? And asking the question a lot, like, where do we get such and such idea from? Like, because I want to be able to identify like the norms that have been passed down because of oppression, because of subjection, right? And what are the gifts of my ancestors? I know the traumas, like I know so much about the traumas, but what about the gifts that they've given us? So
Totally. It's easy to focus on white supremacists that are flagrant, police, and other soldiers of white supremacy that stamp out Black rage. But you say rank and file white people also do this.
Yes.
Just ordinary run-of-the-mill, not uniformed, no KKK hood, no MAGA hat even.
Yeah.
And they try to stamp out Black rage. Why does it make white people so uncomfortable to see people of color angry? Especially Christian people of color. Especially Christian white people.
Yeah. I don't really know. But I mean, I have my suspicions, right? Like, I think that, okay, from my own experience, learning that, not just learning, but really seeing that the myth of America's exceptional democratic tradition is not just imperfect, as we like to say, but it's just false.
Yeah.
Right? Seeing that, like, okay, I've been reading more about fascism, imperialism, and particularly wanting to understand more about Black-led anti-fascist movements for about a year or so now. And this one author, actually, I have his book open right now, so I'm going to just look at the cover, right? Because I would say I don't remember the name, which I don't, but since it's right here, Mark Bray's book, Antifa, he mentions a historian that talks about how, okay, so fascism in its formal sense, like using the name fascism, may have been birthed in like the early 20th century, but functionally, fascism originated in the US, in the South, with the KKK. And like when you go back into America's story and go down to the roots, you see like there is this deep anti-democratic political tradition in America, right? to the point to where, like, by the time people were calling things fascism, Black Americans were saying, "Yeah, we don't need you to define that word for us." Langston Hughes said that, actually, at an international writers conference. He's like, "We don't Black people in America don't need to be told what fascism is. We experience it every day in the States."
Totally. Yeah.
That was so hard for me to ingest and to accept, that, like, the America that I was told existed as a child, the flag that I pledged allegiance to, the patriotic songs that I sang, were just, like, filled with a lot of lies. Right?
Totally. I mean, yeah, to experience that is that's life-changing right there.
It's hard, As I say it, I still, like, in my body, like, I feel, like, I think that what I'm feeling, the sensations that I feel, like, my skin is, like, tingling right now as I say it. And I think that there is a huge sense of loss, right? From
Totally.
that. I don't know if America can be the place that it ever claimed to be for everyone, but I know that it was never intended to be that for everyone. That is hard, especially when people I really identify with being American, with this country, and thinking like they're a part of one of the greatest political projects that ever existed in the history of mankind. I think that there are a lot of people who, as Walter Brueggemann says, I think, in The Prophetic Imagination, that there's this widespread refusal to grieve.
Yes.
And I think that I think a lot of white people are trying to avoid that. I think another thing is that, and I'm pretty sure that I wrote about this in the Personalist Political chapter, and I think it goes through that follows the thread through the We Can All Be White chapter, is that white identity is very much tied up in the notion of superiority, right? And I think that the truth is that a lot of white people wouldn't even know that would trigger an identity crisis for them to really, like, do some work to understand that them thinking that, for instance, for example, and this is like on the far end of, like, just, like, explicit racism, but I used to have this troll that used to tweet me every day, all day. And I remember tweeting something about colonization. He was like, "Oh, so you all want to go back to living in huts and all that kind of stuff." And, like, as though, like, some of the first civilizations, I mean, I dare to say the first civilizations in human history were in Africa, right? But there is this psychological need for white people to feel like they are inherently superior in this way, right? Like, the world that they... I'd be trying to be careful with my words. But I think you get what I'm saying, right? Is like there's this psychological benefit that white people get from identifying with whiteness so strongly. And I think at the end of the day, the most simple thing is just that, like you said earlier, we all know that racism, or I was going to say we all know that racism is bad, but in 2022, I don't know. Some people are debating about that. But for most of my life, white people seem to understand that racism is bad. And so to be identified with racism means that they are bad people.
Right.
And that they're not redeemable. It's the worst thing that they could ever be called. Right. And as I say that, and I know I'm taking a long time to answer this question, I'm sorry.
It's good. It's good.
But as I say that, I also have to say that they kind of have a point here, because we don't live in a world that generally, I feel, that where there's a common sense that, like, you can do bad things, you can think bad things, and you can also be redeemed as a person, right? You can grow, you can become better, right? I don't think that generally, by and large, there is this restorative common sense in our culture. Now, where does that punitive common sense come from?
Whiteness. You know?
Exactly.
That's exactly right. Like, what's this carceral system that you're afraid of?
Exactly.
It's different.
Exactly. But it's there, right? And so I think that a part of the denial, I think a part of the denial is that a lot of white people feel like, well, if I'm a racist, then that's it. It's it's the scarlet letter, and they're going to hell, right? And then, of course, I think the other part of it has to do with power. Whether white people know it consciously or not, I do think that there's a reason why either people are actively or passively or being used as useful idiots. And I don't mean that I think they're stupid, but I mean the literal, like, technical term useful idiots for folks who are way more powerful and connected, to use them to use their fear and use their racial anxiety so that they can hold on to power. I think all those things are like in this soup, right? That make it really hard for white people to grieve, right?
Totally.
Engage the fact that, yes, you have been fooled. You have been duped. And in the words of Malcolm X, you have been hoodwinked and bamboozled. Mm-hmm. And that you need to be set free.
Absolutely. The defensiveness that comes with, like, trying to defend colonialism. It's apparently evil. You defend it because you can't even bear to see that there's so much evil there. Like, you have to defend whiteness, colonialism, Christianity, because certainly there has to be some good.
Yeah.
And that just erases our experience. You say, why should these representatives of persecuted minority groups have to sit down and convince someone else that their lived experience is valid?
Yep.
It's a great question to ask. We're not talking about sitting down with, Donald Trump and convincing him that our lived experiences matters. You were talking about sitting down with, white liberals that do agree that racism is wrong. You said not everybody agrees that racism is wrong. That's true. But even among the people that do, they're so connected to their whiteness that they can't see. And it is completely humiliating to just be like, I'm just asking to be seen.
Yeah, like at a certain point, it's like, and I remember making this connection before, like in real time on another podcast where it was like, I remember I was in an abusive relationship years ago. I was engaged to this woman. And I always feel like it's important as I bring up this story to say, like, I don't believe in like this good, bad binary. Like my ex was a wonderful person in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And also I believe did not have the common sense or resources to know how to deal with their anger, right? There was a lot of just deconstruction that she needed to do around a bunch of ideas. And I felt very mistreated in that relationship. And that went on for a long time. So there was a long time where I tried to talk to her about what it felt like when she would put me down, call me names, curse at me, tell me that I couldn't accomplish my dreams, all this other kind of stuff, right? Right. I would try to help her understand what it feels like thinking that I could help her be more empathetic, right? And if I could help her to understand the damage that she was doing, then she would have this realization and she would stop. And so I went as far as literally like drawing like a children's book. Like I took some white printer paper and some crayons and I wrote her a little book and stapled it together and gave it to her.
Wow.
None of that stuff worked. None of it worked. And it is humiliating.
It is.
When on a personal level, when it's like because you have more worth than that to try to do that. And eventually I had to just realize like, it's not going to stop. Right. Well, I feel like a lot of white people expect for marginalized people, for Black people in particular, because I mean, that's what I know the best. Other people can tell me if they relate to this too, but that they want for us to beg them, plead with them, convince them, save them, to see our humanity. But like, we've got our own stuff to do.
Absolutely.
Like, we've got our own lives to live.
Mm-hmm.
We've got healing work that we've got to do. We've got unlearning to do our own selves from living under this system. You know, we can't spend our whole lives making coloring books for these people. You know?
Especially with no results.
Especially with no results.
No, I mean there's no return on this huge investment.
Yes, exactly. Right. What we get is and I experienced a while, right? I think for people who read the book, like you see, like there's a very different Andre in the beginning of the book from
Totally,
the Andre at the
absolutely.
end.
You're talking
Because
to a lot of white people, white family members in the beginning of the book, people
yes,
connected to you, and it's painful. And eventually you just like throw up your hands, be like, I can't do it.
and a part of that is because those conversations are reliving the same wound, right? It's like it's the same pain. It's like you yeah, it was the same conversations over and over again, right? And the same experience over and over again of not being believed, of being, you know, of your feelings being minimized, of being gaslighted in many ways. And so, yeah, like we can't keep doing it, like you said, with no results. Yeah.
Absolutely. You were at Relevant, and people in our church listened to this story and really resonated with them because like it was like during Black History Month, and one of our Black members wanted to write prayers on our daily prayer blog for Black History Month, and she got from the white pastor the same answer your editor did.
Oh, what about people who are uninterested in that or something?
Exactly, something like that, right?
Wow.
So you're there, you're at Relevant, you want to do this feature on, and it's online content and print content, right?
Yeah.
It's always interesting with online content, how they still want to limit it, even though there's so much space.
Yeah. There's endless space.
And you got basically told you can't write about this, and then you lost like editorial power.
Yes.
As a result.
Yes.
And Relevant, I'm not trying to name it too much, but like it's supposed to be like a somewhat progressive Christian publication, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think that, my impression of it, because I was a fan of Relevant magazine when I was in college, you know what I mean? Like it was like the coolest Christian thing, in my world. And they were interviewing actors, not actors from Christian movies, just like actors, musicians, like
yeah, totally.
Publishing books about Lauryn Hill and U2 and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, yeah, I think that in some ways it's from the outside it seemed kind of progressive, yeah.
Yeah, but then it just confirmed what you already knew, what you already felt. How did that experience change you?
By the time I got to Relevant, it was like this is me giving the evangelical church one last chance. Like it's not church, right? But it's Christian, right? And they're supposed to be concerned about the world, right? So, I mean, I was really on my last leg, like trying to cross my fingers and hope that like this might redeem some of the pain that I had experienced. And like you said, it just really didn't. It was the same old, because it wasn't like in the office like we're conservative, right? It's not like, oh no, we actually are Trump supporters, so we can't publish that. It was just we want to stay out of it, right? Which seemed to be a common idea of a lot of like large evangelical platforms at the time. Now it seems like I'm not really tuned into the conversation anymore, but now it seems like a bunch of evangelical platforms are just like, no, actually we're just fascists now.
Totally. I mean, it's all over the place. There's the lack of shame around Christian nationalism right now is surprising.
Yeah. But at that time it was more like we wanted to stay above the fray is what it was. And people just didn't understand. But that meeting in particular about Black History Month was that was shocking. That was really shocking. I mean, I wrote about the conversation in the book, and I think the article that I wrote about that a few years ago is still up on my Medium blog. But the conversation was really shocking because I just expected more. I just expected more from the leadership there than to basically say, well, we don't care about that. you know?
Has anyone ever reached out to you after that? Any apology, anything like that?
Yeah, and I mentioned this in the footnotes of the book. Like, someone who was not the offender reached out to me to apologize. So I had to ask them, okay, well, is this coming from you? Is this coming from the company? Who is this apology coming from? Oh, well, everybody. Well, everybody didn't do something. So,
Yeah.
so
Right.
what does this apology mean? Okay, so then the offender sent an apology, but it was like, so and so told me that something happened in this meeting and I'm really sad about that. And I'm like, okay, so there's no admission that I did something that caused harm to you. And you know what I mean? Like,
That's painful. Yeah.
you know, and I knew because people in the office had already been talking to me when it happened that the first reaction to the article that I wrote about Relevant was that the offender was just in the office laughing about it, just thought it was going to blow over. So I know that like 3 days later, when you send me this one paragraph that doesn't name what happened, doesn't name you as the person who committed the action, and doesn't really say, you know, I realize that what I did was harmful. I'm sorry for the harm that it caused you, and I'm committed to not doing it again. What does this mean?
Totally.
I mean, there's a lot that I could have put in the book just about my experience with Relevant and just learning about some of the things about organizing people too, because there were a lot of people who were hurt in that organization. But there was a clear difference between the way that people of color that were harmed wanted to handle that and people who are not people of color wanted to handle that.
Totally.
Right. And what people of color felt they needed and what they felt was appropriate, because there was among the people of color involved, there was a desire for some kind of restorative justice process. Not like, and this is something that I talk about, is like it seems that white people in America think that racial justice means that they will be destroyed, right? Like, that's what racial justice means to them. But here we are saying, we don't want to ruin this guy's business. We don't want this guy to go into exile forever. We would like an apology. And we would like for you to change some things about the structure of your business so people are not harmed this way in the future.
Totally.
That's what we would like. And the way that other white ex-employees were talking to me in particular about this, because the responsibility to kind of steward that process kind of fell to me. A lot of responsibility fell to me. And so, folks are like, what are you going to do? Chase down every boss that's ever hurt you and try to ruin their lives? Why are you trying to destroy this man? Da, 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 da. There was so much preoccupation with what happens to this person. And I had to keep saying over and over again, or I found myself feeling the need to say over and over, this is not really about that person. This is about all the other people who have been hurt and the people who will continue to be hurt.
Totally.
If things continue to operate in this way.
White supremacy exaggerates the discomfort of white people and turns it into pain and diminishes the oppression of its victims, So you're in this constant battle where, like, this person who offended you're going to destroy them? Well, what about me? What about all these people? What are we going to do about that?
And there was so much Christian rhetoric in it where it's like people are talking to me about grace and, talking to me and like, oh, okay, so because I eventually started even saying to them, like, this situation isn't even healthy for the offender. Like, this person's going to keep on being in this position where it's like they actually shouldn't be in this position to cause this much harm to people, And I remember one person going, oh, I see now, like, you are concerned for them. And I'm sitting here like, why does that even matter though? Like
Totally.
that's the thing that justifies it for you, but not the fact that there are like 40 people over
Hmm.
the course of the entire organization's history that can say, yeah, I'm I had to go to therapy after working there. Those kinds of things,
Wow.
That was really wild.
It's a wild experience. It's a,
It
it's a
was
relatable
wild.
story to a lot of us.
Yeah, and it really drove home the point though to me that like a lot of these that for a lot of people, because I remember in the book what I wrote about was like it seemed like what these people were imagining was we're going to do a Black History Month series and we're going to lose everything. Mind you,
Totally.
the series was not we're going to post 80 articles about Black history
Right.
or relevant to racial justice. We're going to post 20 out of 80
Yeah.
that have to do with racial justice. And these people are like losing their minds. They're like, oh my gosh, but like you think this is going to take your business. And so it really drove home the point to me that like that a lot of white people imagine racial justice as their destruction. It will destroy them, which is
They still think that
yeah. Which
all the time.
if you magnify that, right? Like that's the great replacement theory in itself, right? Is that
Mhm.
like if these people if we read about Black people in history class, if we learn about Native cultures and those kind of stuff, like if we acknowledge that the nuclear family image and the American dream of the husband, the wife, the boy and the girl kid and the dog with the white picket fence may not be like for everyone, right? Like that might not be the way that everyone needs to
Totally.
live or whatever, right? Like the whole world's going to fall apart. Like they imagine that if they are not able to continue to denigrate other cultures and keep their norms as the mold that everyone else has to fit in, then like the world will be in disarray, right?
Totally. Totally.
And they're going to disappear, right?
Hmm.
They can't exist in any meaningful way if they don't exist as superiors, right? It seems to be like what they believe, and that really drove that home for me. That experience in that organization, because I couldn't believe that posting 25% or 20% about racial justice during Black History Month
Would
would cause
destroy.
such a
Yeah.
yeah
It's
would cause such
wild.
a stir.
You eventually walk away from predominantly white institutions and organizations, and you say,
Mm-hmm.
white people need to learn to share power, but we also
Yep.
need to empower ourselves.
Yes.
Talk to how does a predominantly white church become one that's built by the oppressed? Is that possible, Andre?
A predominantly white church built by the oppressed? No, I
Yes.
don't know. I don't know because you know my home church growing up was predominantly Black and brown. I
Mm-hmm,
mean, it
mm-hmm.
was Caribbean, African, Asian, you know, but they never had a pastor of color.
Wow.
Never one
It
time.
was always a white person?
Always a white man. Always a white man. And so the reason why I say like I don't know if you're going to have a predominantly white church, predominantly white institution that's run by a person of color unless that person of color is also committed to uh, white hegemony,
Mm-hmm.
right? because because I don't see white people ever in like I don't ever see large groups of white people following a non-white leader, right? Um, not even saying that like all arrangements need to be hierarchical in that way, but that pretty much is kind of the way that a lot of our organizations and institutions are set up, right? Like you have a president or a CEO or something like that, right?
Totally. So
Um,
you're saying people of color leaders of PWIs are often not committed to anti-racism.
I don't even know any.
Is that what it means then when you say like, "Hey, we can all be white," that type of thing?
Yeah, right. Like anyone can be committed to white power, and anyone can be committed to
Even if they're a
maintaining
victim
white
of it.
power. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Right. Like, I mean, even African revolutionaries write about how like white imperialists could have never been able to accomplish what they did in Africa without the help of African people. Right.
Totally.
And I think about this all the time when like I'm watching Handmaid's Tale or something like that, right? Like, I don't know if you watched that show or if you've read that book, but it's like, it's not just that like, and this is art reflecting life, art imitating life. You know, it isn't just that like there's a bunch of men that have all these women as handmaids and are abusing them. It's that like I think the architect of that situation in the show is a woman, right?
Totally. Yeah,
Which is
that makes
showing, I
sense.
mean, it's art imitating life because like, and this is something when it comes to racism, a lot of people don't understand. It's like one of the dumbest counter arguments that people try to launch. I shouldn't say dumb, but I mean like it's basic, right? Like when people are like, oh, but like this person is black, so how could they be supporting white supremacy? Like they just say the same things that white supremacists say, you know, vote for the
Totally.
same people white supremacists vote for, support the same policies, you know.
And
Yeah,
it's noteworthy in non-black communities that anti-blackness also exists as well.
yes. Yeah, because everybody, I think that a lot of people understand that if they can, somehow find themselves in the good graces of whiteness, right? If they can assimilate to some degree, align themselves as much as they can, then maybe they'll fare better than those who are the victims of it. I mean, I'm in Colombia right now. I've met white Colombians that tell me they don't like black people, right? Right? They don't like black people. They don't like black Colombians, right? So they tell me, right? But they want to go to Canada or they want to go to the US or something like that because they can have a better life. And I'm like, well, aren't you in for a surprise?
Yeah, I mean that my
You
parents are
know,
totally in that zone.
yeah. Aren't you in for a surprise, Mr. Velasquez, when you find that you don't get the same treatment as Mr. Smith, you know?
Totally.
Mind you, like you have to get a visa to travel to my country. They don't want you here. You know what I'm saying? But a lot of people have the same notion that many lower class white people have had in America for many years, which is, okay, no, I may not ever have the money or power as Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whatever, but at least I'm not black.
Mm. Mm.
And that really has been, I mean, I can't remember who, I think it was W.E.B. Du Bois who talked about that. It's like the psychological wage or something like that. It's like the racial bribe, of being white. It's a lot of people's attitudes. And so I see that a lot. And that's partly why I wrote the book. Like I know that white people can learn a lot from it, but I partly wrote the book because I know a handful of black men in particular, and I think this is a problem amongst us black men, that there's a handful of black men that I could name, that I won't, that I could name, that are like, they're playing the game, right? They're not trying to dismantle the system or whatnot because they think that they can win.
Totally.
They think they can win at the game as it exists. But the cost of it, right, is that they kind of have to be a traitor to their own people.
Absolutely. We do our best. We try to make it. I understand assimilation. I understand why we try.
Yeah.
But it's a raw deal. You'll never get there, And for what
Right.
it's worth, for poor white people, for working class white people, it's the same deal. You just white,
Yeah. Right.
You're getting oppressed by the same forces.
Right. Yes, it's oppressed by the same forces, but also feel that they could become, right? Like, I think that's the thing, is like they don't see themselves as oppressed. They see themselves as aspiring
Totally.
aspiring oppressors.
It's yeah, exactly. And it's a raw deal for them too. White supremacy affects all of us, really.
Yeah.
For people of color, we'll wrap this up pretty soon, Andre. For people of color that have left institutions, have left churches, what can organizations do to listen to their experience, listen to their pain, and change? Without
Yeah,
even adding labor to them.
this is really interesting to me because it's like you see an organization get called out by an individual. Take the NFL with Colin Kaepernick or something, right?
Good example.
I don't even think Kaepernick was calling out the NFL initially. He was just bringing attention to an issue in the country, right?
No, I mean,
And then he got
police brutality, police killing black people.
right, and then he got blackballed by the NFL, and they basically forced him out of the league, right? And then afterward, like they start allowing a little bit more leeway when it comes to like addressing these issues, right? Like the agreement with Jay-Z is definitely not perfect or whatever. I don't even know if it's good, but it's a step in the direction that Kaepernick was pushing the league anyway, right? I actually got a couple of songs picked up by the NFL Network for the Super Bowl this year. And I remember like a couple of the producers talking about one of the pieces that they were working on is like, this was their way of trying to, at least address something that was going on in the world without rocking the boat too much. And so I'm bringing this up to say, like, I see organizations do this a lot where it's like they push people out that are pushing them in the direction that they need to go in. Afterward, because of the public feedback or whatever, they realize, okay, well, we're not going to be able to keep on doing business as usual. But they don't just listen to the person that they kicked out in the first place. In fact, I mean, they may as well just bring the person back and say, okay, what were you saying? Right?
Totally.
But a lot of organizations don't do that. And so I've also been brought into different conversations with different organizations where there are constituents of color that are trying to push the leadership to not push the leadership, but are asking the leadership to listen to them. The leadership doesn't want to, they're very reluctant about it. And I just watch those people get burnt out and leave.
Totally. Yes, I've seen that all the time.
Yeah. And so like you don't want to like be put in this position where it's like you have to be the resident non-white person that has to like deal with all of that process of grief and pastor people through that and shepherd people through that, unless that's your thing. Like some people have the grace to do that. And at the same time, like it's going to be business as usual if that organization doesn't have people who are from those communities and politically aware, not just Black faces in high places. That doesn't do anything. But people who have those perspectives that actually have decision-making power.
Totally.
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, I think that that's part of the issue is that like a lot of these leaders and organizations seem to be looking for consultants, right?
Totally.
Right. Advice. And really what they're trying to do is make sure that the organization doesn't appear to be racist.
Which is much different than being anti-racist.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I've often said like when I was more interested in like seeing, I shouldn't say it like that. I mean, I am still interested in seeing churches and religious institutions participate in social movements, but I'm not committed to trying to get reluctant evangelical churches to do what they don't want to do. Right. Yeah. But when I used to keep saying like, especially because a lot of those churches in particular are like the pastor holds so much power, that it's like if the pastor themselves is not on a journey to understand like how might I be participating even unwittingly in the preservation of white power, then nothing's going to happen. So I think there's a combination of those things, right? Like where the leadership needs to understand that any of us can be upholding this oppressive power structure. And we need to be personally committed to learning about what that system looks like, how it works, so that we can see how we might be doing that and we can change.
Absolutely.
Right. And then also like you need to have other people from these communities that are politically aware that also have decision-making power with you, because otherwise, like if it's just like Yeah, Andre's our graphic designer, but he's the only Black person in the office, so we're just gonna like keep running things by him. Then like that is kind of like exhausting,
It totally
you know.
is.
Especially if you don't listen to the graphic designer of color that you keep sending stuff to. So it's like, why am I giving you my opinion anyway? You're just gonna do whatever you want to do,
Totally.
right? I mean, but those are some things that come to mind for me. It's like
Excellent.
sharing actual decision making power, and the leadership needs to be actually like on a journey themselves.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Andre. So good to talk to you. The books, All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. Where can we follow what you're up to these days? Your music, what you're writing, what's
Yeah.
happening?
I mean, the best way to keep in touch with me is my email list on my website, andrehenry.co. That has like I send out links, stuff that I'm reading or that I've come across that I think are interesting, noteworthy,
Okay.
updates on projects, um, like nuggets of like insight that I'm gleaning from my studies and stuff like that. And then obviously like all other places that I am online like are super easy to find from there.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. And where can we hear your music?
Literally anywhere music is streaming. I also send out, updates when I have new songs on my mailing list, but literally if you
Awesome.
use iTunes, Apple Music, Spotify, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, whatever you use,
Okay.
YouTube,
That's awesome.
I'm there.
Well, cool. So good to have you, Andre. Glad you're on our show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks
Yep.
again.
To wrap things up, we like to share what has been nourishing to us. We all need stuff that like feeds our life with God. And it's good to pay attention to that nourishment in intentional ways. So, pastors, what has been feeding you? What can you share today?
I think we've already mentioned this book, but I just want to say it again. Danya Ruttenberg's book on repentance and repair is one I read a few weeks ago, and the way the rabbi talks about how to seek repentance and how to do it privately and publicly and what rebuke means and what forgiveness means and what atonement means, right? She has a really strong sociological and theological perspective that is super helpful for me in understanding how to do work, especially around racist harm and other kinds of, sexist harm, homophobic harm, but also interpersonal. So I think it was good for me to read as a pastor. And also helpful for me to see how the challenges we have with repenting actually can sometimes come up directly from the Christian tradition. And what it means to atone, be forgiven once and for all. Sometimes we want to mimic how Jesus forgives, while we forget that there was a real cost to how Jesus forgives us. It didn't just happen. Jesus died and rose again and suffered, and there was a lot of process. So it helps pave the way for how it might look for us to make repair too.
I'm really appreciating that book too, Jonny. And I'm also finally reading This Year Flesh, Spirituality, Liberation, and the Stories That Make Us by Cole Arthur Riley. And I've been following Black liturgies on Instagram for a while, but so glad to be finally in this exquisite book. What a powerful work of vulnerability and wisdom Cole Arthur Riley has offered to the world. And it's really helping me to tune into my own experience in my body and and feelings, and to kind of sit more patiently and gently with the process there. And so I was in a text conversation yesterday with somebody and felt like I was able to kind of respond in a more authentic way, and just grateful for the invitation, I think, to slow down and consider all that is happening in me and the world around me a little more consciously.
I went to see Les Mis. Our whole family went this past week. Les Mis is in Philadelphia, and I've seen it before and love it and love all the music, and I wanted my kids to experience it. Unfortunately, they did not share my love in the same way.
They didn't love it?
Not even when you get to, do you hear the people sing?
No, not even there. I mean, it didn't help that, whatever, I'm not here to talk about my kids' experience of it. But we got tickets. It was like a last minute deal. This is what spurred our decision to go. There were tickets for like $31, and the only seats available were in the top section. So we were literally on like eye level with the chandelier, the top of the chandelier. So we saw everything looking straight down on top. And if you've ever sat in the top, this is at the Academy of Music. Mm-hmm. The seats are tiny and there's like no room to move. And so we were packed in there, and there, unfortunately, we had an obstructed view seat with the pole in front of us. So the kids were not loving it. And it was hard. It was hard to experience the show that way, I'll be honest. But it fed my soul because I know the music and I know the story. And it was just so powerful. Like even up there, even with not great visibility, the sound, the music, the words of the songs were just like, enveloping us. And it was just so powerful to be in the room with people, what do I want to say? Like just with their powerful voices and such beautiful music. So not to mention this great story of forgiveness, redemption, change, someone who cannot change. And anyway, so just the experience. I love live theater. I love musicals. So just doing that fed my soul.
Beautiful.
Write to us and tell us what is your own spiritual show and tell. Like what is nourishing your life with God, your life as a full human being made in the image of God. It gives us joy to hear that. Thanks for listening, and until next time, peace be with you.